then you can talk.
Yes.
Company. 되게 힘들어 그게.
나도
그거. 오케이.
하지만 건지게 됐어.
응. 그 Japanese way.
Originally
Japanese Americans are good.
but I think it's okay.
예. How is your
Health?
Oh.
Well, pretty good. You know, once.
so your life is something very precious. Not only about that personally, but all over together. And especially for the industry again.
Yes, doesn't show your PC. Has he been behaving himself?
Yeah.
저의 원하는 그
So you're going to have to learn to slow down in all these trips, huh?
Again, next week, go to Ladakh.
I wanted to ask you, I wanted to share some ideas with you. You know, in the Catholic Church, every 25 years, they have a thing called the Holy Year, for the whole year. And it's based on the Jewish notion of Jubilee, where debts are forgiven, prisoners are released, and things like that, you know. And, President, how are you? Good to see you. So, recently the Catholic Church had a Holy Year 2000. So the next one is another 22 years, something like that. I was thinking that, came from out of meditation, that what the world needs is an interfaith Holy Year. Interfaith Holy Year. Not just Catholic Holy Year, Jewish Holy Year, Buddhist Holy Year, Hindu, but an interfaith Holy Year. And then there could be various centers that.
In fact, just in Ladakh, I met some organizations, Buddhist association, so many associations, Buddhist Youth Association, Buddhist Association, Gombai Association, like that. Then I suggested to them, maybe, of course, entirely up to them, but I felt it is worthwhile to consider to have another association, interfaith association. I suggested. So now you are suggesting interfaith Holy Year. That's very good. Very good.
And
Actually, it's just the sound. I can bring something. That's good.
And then, like Assisi could be one focal point, Dharamsala could be another, or Bodh Gaya, Varanasi, you know, Mecca, no, Jerusalem possibly, and some indigenous Native
Very
American.
good.
Anyway, this is just in the planning stage, and of course it would have pilgrimages in it and dialogues and so forth.
But the response condition great.
What would be the response?
What would
From
be the
important leaders
Well,
of different tradition.
it depends on how it's put across, you know, how it's explained to me. Hong was suggesting possibly connecting it with the Parliament, but of course the Parliament is only one interfaith organization. There are 7, 8, 9, 10 interfaith organizations. And I wouldn't want it to come under their authority, because I think it should be much broader than that. It should, you know, have people from all.
Because the world response is there.
Yeah.
Yes. I think very good idea.
You see,
Uh,
the World Parliament religion usually nothing comes out of it. Year after year
He
after
knows
year.
that.
Sorry.
mm.
But if you
Oh, the mean subject. Oh,
But if you can never
big name. Yes, I agree. Big name,
It's
but
not-
little work.
it's nice to draw on it and truly to be able to have worship together,
Mm.
during the whole year. Like we can choose India as a place, but all the programs then in that whole year can come. 5 years later, it could be Rome or anywhere, but all the programs can go. Then we can truly learn about the faith, but in worship. I mean, maybe not in worship, in contemplation, in silence. And like what we're saying, dialogue has to come out of silence.
True. True.
And
Wonderful.
possibly, I know that politically, some problems with the parliament, because the parliament has not been very supportive of Tibetan struggle, and so forth and so on. And some of us in the parliament have tried for years to get them to see that. But I was thinking, I don't know what your schedule is like. Tenzin Geshe is always pulling his hair out trying to make everything work. But it would be good if you could come for one day to the parliament in Barcelona, July next year, one day. And we could do an event together.
World Parliament, yeah.
Larry,
I think English is also.
여도 열때 지큐티 따다가도 되는데. 근데 제가한테
Not worry.
딱 콘주도 두배나를 봐. 두배 제시하도 왔다. 잉글랜드 두배 콘주단도 synthesis 되나 직접.
Yeah, synthesis in June, early June synthesis in Italy, Rome, Casa Gandalf. And then
World Parliament, July.
July,
No.
July.
가사에
Date
7th to the 13th.
7th.
7th to the 13th.
I don't know. Ladakh.
Where are you then? In that?
Ladakh.
Ladakh?
Ladakh.
Ladakh, oh, it's a long way away.
Actually, I explained to them.
You did.
Yes, first of all, they sent the invitation rather late,
Yes, yes.
and for the Holiness to make another trip,
Mhm.
in
No, that's too
within
much.
a month,
That's,
difficult.
that's too much. So the parliament is out of the question.
I mean, it'd be difficult because of this planned visit to Ladakh.
Okay.
Hey, 그게야 가져오려니. 그거 좀 좋은데, try to show.
Holiness says if it is very important, this Holiness could
Some useful.
reconsider.
Well, I was saying, I think you don't want to reward them for their lack of action by giving them many days, but one day, if we could give them one day, where we could do a program in the morning or in the afternoon related to peace, but
그럼 좋아하죠. 저렇게 영화들이 나오는 식이라고.
Larry, 그런 데리다 치랑 거래. Nasasana. His Holiness, yes, His Holiness would like to reconsider
I'd like to reconsider.
because His Holiness likes the concept of this World Parliament.
May I suggest this then? That from the 5th to the 7th in Montserrat, which you've been to, the monastery of Montserrat in Spain,
Also.
the Assembly of Religious and Spiritual Leaders is meeting there. And His Holiness come the last day, the 7th. So he doesn't have to be there for the whole tedious thing. Come there for the 7th. Then go down to Barcelona and speak at the plenary session, opening session. And then the next morning we can do an event, on silence, meditation, and have dialogue related to silence with meditation, and out of that, a dialogue on nonviolence and peace. Okay? Because the theme of the parliament is streams of peace. We're trying to give some insight to the world about how to get there. See what I'm saying? So, in other words, you'd show up at the assembly and have something to say on the 7th in the monastery. You could come for the whole thing if you wanted to and get a rest in the monastery. And then come down to Barcelona for the opening of the parliament there. and speak at the plenary session on the 7th in the evening, the opening session. And then the next day we could have this event, and we can
We
plan
can
it.
discuss later.
Yeah, we can discuss it later. So you'd like to come?
Mhm.
Good. Very good.
I think you should.
Would you like to have a couple days to rest at Montserrat, the monastery?
Well,
No,
no.
No, not necessary. Okay.
High energy.
Okay.
High energy.
High energy. He loves that monastery.
Yes.
He loves that monastery. Yeah. All right, and then a very interesting idea that Father Sean, he was a student of mine,
Mhm.
and I'm trying to inspire him to go into interfaith work. See, may I take this?
Hmm?
Can I do this? Thank you, the mouth is getting dry. But he had a wonderful idea that we start a process of having, in the United States, an interfaith group on the road, that goes on the road. So it goes to major cities inside of 1 month, maybe each weekend doing a program, one Los Angeles, Washington, New York, Chicago, and where you have 5, 6, or 7 traditions represented. And the whole idea would be to give a teaching to the world on diversity, the value of pluralism, the value of diversity, and the importance of nonviolence, and to demonstrate that spiritual leadership cannot in any way, shape, or form ever support violence. That the person, you know what I'm saying? So that's another idea. I mean, that's up the road. We're thinking about that. And then you're going to be in Vancouver in March, right? In March 2004, Vancouver?
April, March, April, something.
March, April. April,
Yeah.
2004. Now, but Hong is from Vancouver, and she organizes interfaith events there as well.
But not this one.
Not this particular one. Now, what we were wondering is if we could have one more day when you're there, where we do an event one day.
No,
maybe you could,
I think
no?
that it might not be a good idea because there are 2-3 days as soon as has to be in the university.
Okay, university.
And they've asked for 2 more days.
2 more days.
And as soon as has agreed to that.
이것이 싸움치는지요.
Larry.
나가겠죠.
He take my
재미를 가주셔야지.
long. And then another teaching to a Chinese, and that whole
Chinese.
trip is very long.
Very long. Very
Yes.
long, okay.
Interfaith
We
signal.
actually don't need
You're-
a full day.
You don't need a full day? Why don't you explain?
저는 라프지 자고르지 그 작업 시작이 있는데 주준이지 고로 주준이지. And in the people session to
We actually,
No,
Signal 말해. Interfaith signal.
they can't, you need to show it.
유지진.
그렇죠.
어.
제 팀 한테 갔다도 샤바제요. 제가 계속 그랬죠. 무시무시하죠.
The half day seminar, half day, one university programs half day. The same day, half day, some interfaith.
Yes, yes.
actually, I'll tell you the reason behind this, the holiness is, if we can have a half-day interfaith session where I really would like no charge for it, where we
Hmm?
there
No
is
charge.
no charge for
Don't
it, it's
charge
only
the
for
people.
recovery costs.
그래서
대무 말레미 체제 미소요.
So people can really just come, and then following that, we will run 2 other days with Wayne, TC, John Barasenko, you know all of them, of a silent dialogue out of silence. So there's meditation period there on the interfaith session for 2 other days following that. And it'd be good if we can plan it on the last day of that, because after that, in the middle, that night, we have a fundraising banquet for the
For the nuns project.
with Lynchla.
fundraising.
Fundraising for
any
Krishna.
competition that physical life. They never come at the Chinese.
But it's nothing to do with that, it's just after when TC and Wayne and Joe Sanko in one interfaith dialogue, silence and meditation, then in between the 2 days that we run it, we have a fundraising project for the nuns project at night. But the thing is, flyer, because these are all new names in Vancouver, unless we can piggyback onto your conference.
해주세요.
Interfaith work.
근데 그게 다 촌도나다 대주 첩직도 제는 그런도 단다.
그래서
다 말로 현대주의 도졸이야. 대지 계산체 용서를 했으니까. So okay.
네, 무슨 강사게 가면서다. 근데 작업줘야 애월줘야 되지.
너는
그래서 디그리를 해줘야 되잖아. 딱그 시작한 거야 지금 말로.
네.
거기 이미 지금 show에 있는. 근데 구두 차요.
We'll work out the
Okay.
date and details later.
It'd be nice at the end of his day so that Wayne and TC.
No, we'll have to now see the overall concept in that area and then when would be a good time to do this interfaith.
So it might actually be before.
It may,
Whatever.
yes, it may.
Whatever.
그것도 죽은데 기억없어.
그래서 주나?
근데 저거 이 사람은 로열에서 시는 저거. 오케이.
Because I went to see the nuns.
음.
The nun project, we have to build the other nunnery.
Very good. Very good. Very good.
So we're thinking about a banquet that's only to
네, 난 좋아.
No matter, 그런지. This fundraising event is separate here.
Totally
Yeah,
separate, totally
난
separate,
오케이.
totally separate.
that's good.
나는 이 판에서 좋아.
Because Holiness usually does not
I prefer not go.
not to participate.
No,
in.
no,
Oh.
no, this is nothing to do with it.
Not that you don't have to do that.
No, no, no.
You.
I won't have a choice. Grandchildren will be there. So I have to go. Have to support it.
나 네가 인터뷰도 그죠. 나
What
내내.
about that?
We're going to, we'll be doing that. He's going to.
오케이.
Yes.
So
He's becoming like, Sergio is like Hispanic Larry King.
저걸 잘.
Is it okay if I take pictures during the interview?
오케이.
Yeah.
do you have to set up a mic?
It's very easy.
Okay, you better set up. 그냥 그 단도 더 제마 지가서 왠기 개노서 와서 똑같아만게
어.
가서 도마체는 집에 놔둔 애들 버릇을 단다가스 잠들으시다고
Before I forget, we have some gifts for you. Maple syrup,
그래.
on your pancakes.
어.
This is from us all.
We needed that in Ladakh.
This is the galaxy.
아. 네, 그게 이제.
The galaxy. The Milky Way galaxy. It's 11. This is 11.
나라 그 중에 밑에 주피터.
in Ladakh at Hyundai, but they have this telescope for watching the stars.
그래서 altitude 4,000, I think 4,400 meters
Yes.
high.
Wow.
And one telescope is star. So first time I directed Jupiter.
To see Jupiter.
To see Jupiter. And to see, did you look?
Yes.
Yes.
That's beautiful.
Ah.
Beautiful.
Last year I visited that place. So then I told them I would try to come this year, mainly to see sky, space, heaven.
Heaven, right.
Yeah, that's destination. Oh, yes.
I also have some gifts for you, brought from some Native American Indians,
Mm.
from Michigan and Wisconsin, to bring dry grass. You can burn it as like an incense.
Yeah, but don't smoke it.
And then there's stories of the Indians here, so you can at least understand who they're coming from. This is a cedar oil that they produce also. It's very rare to make. They never sell it, they just make it. So this is, you can put on your throat chakra, and you can say mantra.
Really?
Yes. It also explains it in all the stories that it's written in the envelope.
How do you work it? What would you
What
use?
is it good for?
You put it on your throat, and you use a chakra. It's the Native American Indian tradition. And the Indians use it.
And it helps as well.
It helps the throat, clearing the throat. So
Okay.
when you do both, so when you talk too much about And then this is from a friend that wanted to send this to you. The one of Guadalupe is the
Lesson
and this is the
I have another tape. I have another tape.
I think he's trying to convert you to Christianity.
40 minutes left on here.
The
2 hours.
The new Pope.
One time French, I think, read. I think French, the cardinal read, archbishop, I think archbishop.
Mr. Shea.
So,
Many years ago,
one
many
of the
years ago.
cardinals in France from this like many years ago.
He actually tried to convert me to Christian.
That is fun. Did you ask him?
Did you have any success?
This very last one
Oh,
is to wish you an abundance of health.
Chinese tradition.
Chinese.
Mhm.
With the donation.
Can I
Thank
set
you.
up a chair where the table is?
Sure, sure.
Is that okay? Between you and Wayne?
Here, you can take this. We can put this.
I can take one of these here? No. Yeah, we'll just put it with this table.
Yeah, I think here, better.
Well, I have
One with chair.
to be between them
Yeah,
both.
yes.
This would be between the two of us.
It's going to take me about 2 minutes to set up, so I can check the time over. So we were in Ladakh last week listening to your teachings,
Could you hear it? I see.
and then we went to Nubra Valley, to your new temple,
Uh,
and we helped the monks cut the mantras. So we sat with the monks for a couple hours.
I see.
So where is your next trip after Ladakh?
After that,
Yes.
oh, yes.
Yes. Oh, September.
Long trip.
TC is coming to,
Yes.
and he is coming, you tell him, he's coming now to Chicago, August 9th, for my profession. He's coming for that.
Yes, he told me.
He told you.
That's good. I think his recent visit or program in America seems very successful.
Yes. He
I'll
has
check one, too.
he has a DVD.
Check.
Film
Hmm.
of the dialogue. Does His Holiness have facility to see the film? See a DVD film?
I've done that. This is our
I have Finding Nemo. I could give him.
You can see it on a computer. You can see it on a computer.
not much interest.
Not much interest.
But I appreciate your joining.
I have 37 minutes left on this
Another
tape.
Christian.
Plus, I have one more tape for 1 more hour.
Lawrence?
So I could tape for
No,
2
no.
hours total.
I'm with TC.
You're
Some program, yes, one school.
Oh, yes, yes,
Oh.
it's San Francisco
Oh.
University, where Monica and Alex are from.
Yes.
Yes. Hello. The purpose of this dialogue, I guess, is to talk about Buddhism and Christianity, them coming closer together in the relationship to affect the world, and I guess, and also the other traditions. But since I have a Christian sannyasi and a Buddhist monk, I'd like to talk mostly about Buddhism and Christianity. In Buddhism, they talk mostly about compassion is the main message, whereas Christianity is love. Can you just talk a little bit about the similarities or differences?
philosophy. I think I think the concept about love, compassion, some differences. But the basic thing is, but the essential thing is it taking care of others, and also, you see the, and sort of also the series of concern about others' welfare and with respect. Not kind of look down, pity, sort of pittiness, but taking care with respect and recognize they also have the same right as oneself have. So, I think essential thing, I think it's very same. For the Christian practitioners, their practice of love, compassion. And obviously, very effective. And that, I think, concept lead, I think, number of monks, nuns, or some others, Christian practitioner, is willing to sacrifice their own privileges, their own right, in order to serve to others. So that's, yeah.
Wayne, from your perspective, can you tell us some about the similarities or differences?
Well, I think what His Holiness said about being other-centered, that compassion is other-centered, love is other-centered. Something about love, maybe to nuance it, to clarify it, shows a bit of a difference from compassion, but I think it requires the same kind of dedication, the same letting go of self. Is this word, caritas, which is a Latin word for charity, but I think the English translation, charity, is very minimal in meaning compared to the richness of the Latin word caritas, which means selfless love, which includes compassion, and is related to a whole order of life, which the Christian tradition calls the kingdom of heaven. That the kingdom, Christ said, the kingdom of heaven is here, meaning that it is a whole order of action and attitude and awareness and consciousness, and you see it epitomized in a very healthy monastery. In a healthy monastery, in the Christian tradition, I would assume the Buddhist too, where they have that awareness of love for one another, and that it's not focused on self, but on the welfare of each person in each moment, spontaneously. I think they're very, very similar. In my everyday life, I personally don't see that much of a difference.
When you speak about the kingdom of heaven, and in Christianity you talk about, in the Gospels Jesus talk about the kingdom of heaven is within. In Buddhism we talk about Buddha nature is within everyone. Every human being has that potential to reach enlightenment. They all have Buddha nature. Essentially, can these both really be the same thing? We're just coming from different times and different places, in different contexts, but ultimately in reality, then be the same thing?
Of course, these are very vast subject. My English word is not sufficient. But I think, roughly speaking, I think concept may be differences, but I think the effect, I think same. So different concept, different sort of interpretation or different sort of explanation. But the important is impact in our mind. I think there, I feel it's the same sort of, let's say, the impact. It's not I feel.
So would you compare the same thing with meditation and prayer? They have the same effect, or very similar effects?
Yes, prayer certainly. Prayer certainly. Of course, we Buddhist, the prayer, Buddha, was. But I think usually I describe all the spiritual tradition except higher being, whether it's theistic or belief or non-theistic, but all is it accepted? There are sort of higher beings. You see. So to them, prayer, something like appeal to these higher beings to seek some guidance or some blessings. So similar. That's usually my I look to see the effect of research that. That's different philosophy. But ultimately, same effect, same result. Good human being, warm-hearted person, sensible person. You know, they ask the different philosophy, different concept. But this ultimately, the main message of love, compassion, forgiveness, contentment, self-discipline, in these matters, same. And also I think effect to humanity, I think same. That's my view.
Okay.
The fruits of the spiritual life, as long as is enumerated, the qualities are the same in a saint in any tradition. Buddhist saint, Hindu saint, Christian saint, Jewish saint, Muslim saint, indigenous saint, that the source is ultimately the same, and it leads to that transformation, the same area. Now, and I agree also the effect can be the same. So like, if you take the Buddhist approach and the Christian approach and the approach of all the traditions from their highest perspective of the saints that have been transformed, the people's lives have been transformed, and take the effect of building a new civilization on our planet that is universal, that comes out of what you say universal responsibility. Universal responsibility to make peace on this planet, to embrace nonviolence, to find other ways to solve our problems and to evolve, and create a vision of society that is based on compassion, that's based on love, a civilization that has a heart. I think that's what the religions should be about. Buddhism and Christianity together, collaborating together, can generate the consciousness of a civilization that has a heart, that's based on compassion, that's based on selfless love, that's based on a vision where it works for the benefit of every human being. No one is left behind. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is closed. Capitalism, globalization gets a heart, gets integrity. And it's not about the bottom line of making money and just benefiting a few, but benefiting the whole of humanity. We have to think in terms of all sentient beings. The animals, the trees, the mountains, the air. We have to begin to think in terms of that. And I think that something like all of our interfaith activities, all the interfaith organizations, any kind of activity we come up with, an interfaith holy year, a pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya, to Jerusalem, to Rome, to Mecca. It has one idea in mind, to get humanity to see that it has to work together.
Yes, exactly.
In regards to, you talk about interfaith, when somebody's learning about other religions, but they're trying to follow their own path, do you see complications or difficulties? For example, many Christians in the West are studying Buddhism, and there is a little bit of a difficulty there because you agree with both or see both, but do you see any conflict with that? And where do you find the best way to find balance?
As I mentioned before, of course, there are differences, particularly in the field of philosophy. There's differences. Even within Buddhism, there are different philosophy. Even if you talk like Buddha, Buddha himself. So one teacher teach different philosophy, contradictory each other. So I think this is, one good example. Even among the Buddhists, among the follower of same teacher, because different mental disposition. The same teacher taught different philosophy. So this indicates the way of approach according individual mental disposition is very important. Therefore, he taught, I think, deliberately different philosophy. So this implies now Buddhism, some other traditions, as in philosophical field, yes, big differences, fundamental differences. But we need that because among the humanity, so many mental disposition. So one way of approach may not sufficient, may not satisfy to variety of people. Therefore, we need different philosophy, different way of approach. I think that knowing that, then study different philosophy, but then according to one's own mental disposition, you see, as far as one individual practice is concerned, yes, the one suitable or most effective sort of method or philosophical sort of way of thinking is to take as an individual sort of practice. But that does not mean that all other your friends also have the same mental disposition, so therefore all have sort of same path. No. Even brothers, sisters have different sort of mental disposition. Even I think twins, maybe on a subtle level, maybe differences. So like that. This is my way of thinking. So then, looking from that kind of perspective, then I can understand all the different traditions with different philosophy and differences are fundamental differences, but all have sort of what's the same potential. All these important traditions really need to humanity. One philosophy, one tradition simply is cannot sufficient. Therefore, once you realize all these are really useful for humanity, then automatically you bring respect towards all these traditions. And then at the same time, as far as my own experience, of course, my knowledge, experience are very limited. But within that, I found, you see, a different tradition, each one had some unities. So therefore, you see, through personal contact, through reading books, and mainly through personal contact, you can learn the value of other tradition, and the specialty of other tradition. That can enrich your own tradition. So some of my Christian brothers and sisters, some actually learning, not only learning some Buddhist method, but also they imply in their own sort of apply in their own sort of practice. I think this is healthy way. Similarly, the Buddhist monks and nuns also, you see, can learn many, I think, practical sort of experiences from Christian brothers and sisters. So that really is helpful to develop genuine mutual respect, mutual admiration.
I disagree with that. Then the other thing is about the Christians and Jews and others adapting this. I don't see that as a problem because it belongs to everyone. All these spiritual treasures belong to each one of us. That the real religion of humanity isn't religion at all, it's spirituality. And it's that transformation of consciousness and heart that comes about. And I know something St. Paul says, he says, all things are for your edification. Edification in Latin, edificare means education. And education in the larger context of your spiritual education. So I see it as all of one piece. You know what I'm saying?
Another thing I wanted to help people understand in regards to Buddhism. They say Buddhism doesn't talk about a God or a higher being, but you talk about all sentient beings reaching enlightenment. Can that state of consciousness, when all consciousness has become enlightened, be God? Can that totality be the higher being, while the consciousness still exists, according to Buddhism?
What do you mean, individual consciousness?
Yes.
Oh.
When all individual
Total consciousness.
when all individual consciousness has reached enlightenment.
I'm not very clear your question.
All
But
individual-
yes, individual person or being, when become Buddha or enlightened, they still, I think there are different, a different view. Some Buddhist school of thought, when your mind reach nirvana, salvation, then eventually your life also they cease. Then the consciousness also cease. That's sometimes called Mahabodhi Nirvana. So then individual consciousness of being no longer exists. One Buddhist school of thought is accept that. But then majority of the school of thought do not accept that view. So when sort of a separate being, when they reach enlightenment or become Buddha, then they also quality is not exactly the same quality, but individual identity, individual being is still remain there.
Okay. So
When enlightened, the individual being merged into some universal. That do not exist.
Okay.
That is not this concept.
So to a Christian, that would be like reaching heaven. If a Christian mind reached enlightenment, that would be coming into a state of heaven, or a place of heaven where everything is.
Yes, now what is I think it might depend on the interpretation of heaven. What is the heaven?
Yeah.
And even I think God, some sort of, I think they take the meaning God is something infinite love,
Mm-hmm.
and that God presence everywhere, and particularly each individual sort of mind, heart. Yes, there is the seed of that. So that fully developed, and maybe what they call the God's place or heaven.
Yeah.
So that's up to my Christian brothers.
Well, my next
I don't
question,
know.
the Christian brother, was: does God have to be in the image of a man, or man in the image of God? Can it be an energy
Yeah,
of consciousness?
I think that it's good to say. I think that the human personality applied to God is a limitation of God. That the divine has no form, it's consciousness, infinite consciousness. It's like in the Hindu tradition, 5,000, 6,000 years ago, what did they say? They came to the realization God is consciousness. The Brahman is consciousness. Right? Not an old man in the sky or an old woman, but consciousness itself. And I have thought for some time that the Buddhist metaphysics of dependent arising, pratitya samutaya, the interconnection of all sentient beings, that the very connectivity itself is consciousness. That which binds them all together is awareness. And that awareness is what we would mean by God. See, that container.
Okay. One last question, please. Regarding today's situation, I think a lot of the troubles with terrorism, with governments, and with economics, the differences between such poor people and so much wealth, how do the religious traditions or the religious leaders get involved in influence, or do they have an influence in the political and the economic arena?
My view is, of course, the real purpose of various different spiritual traditions is serving humanity or helping humanity. So, I think no matter what field, whether economy, whether politics, whether some other sort of thing, which is which is related with humanity. I think when in a certain field, due to certain sort of, wherever there are problems, wherever there is a source of sufferings, the various traditions have the responsibility to help. No matter what field, the economy or politics. So that's my view. So I think the many spiritual practitioners, I think really involved in the field of economy or some others field. I think that's very right. So it is, I think, not right. While what a problem, what was something there, we simply remain in some secluded sort of area and pray or meditation. Of course, prayer and meditation is very good, but at the same time, it's a translation of prayers, or sort of meditation into action, into the society, including the environmental issue. I think the spiritual brothers and sisters, I think, should take more involvement, more commitment in environmental issue or some other sort of issue related with humanity, with world, planet. I think now the time is now coming. People now begin to realize all sort of responsibilities, so more commitment, more involvement, and it's my view.
And I think, for instance, that starting with the issue of violence, this incredible rise of violence and the ease with which some so-called spiritual leaders will advocate violence, or jihad, or to have a conflict. I think a religious or spiritual leader today must embrace non-violence, and that all the religions, all the spiritual leaders have to work together to create an economic system that works for everyone, that has a sustainable relationship with the environment, and that closes the gap between the rich and the poor.
I want to thank you very much for both of you. I really appreciate your time and both of your books. I read books from both of you. They've been a big influence in my life and many other people. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we get a few photographs?
Yes. I want to show you something that TC loves. I tell TC it's him, and then he says, no, it's you.
One problem with him is the Buddhism you mentioned, the shunya, the empty theory. I don't think in Christian philosophy, in Christian room, I don't think this Buddhist philosophy. I think they
That Buddhism isn't compatible.
No. That particular philosophy.
Emptiness.
Oh, there is no absolute. Everything interconnected.
Right.
I think once you believe the theistic, main belief of the theistic sort of system, there's the creator. Creator should be absolute.
Right.
So then the theory of Paticca,
Yes.
there's no absolute. So there's no room of God.
But then shunyata can develop.
so this is really a complicated thing. This I think the Kasa too.
I have a question.
Oh.
Well, we're law students, and so I was wondering, how do you think we could most help society with the practice of law? Like, where do you
Practice of
law?
law.
Law
Like,
student.
how should we focus our energy?
Law student.
Oh.
The Mimalia, the law unit, Shabdera,
Oh. Yes, we always say the rule of law is very important. So you are But then the law has that. Again now, what is law? Or what kind of law?
Like, what kind of law do you think is best?
The
that
Chinese
makes the
also.
most-
The Chinese also, they always, whenever you see they arrest someone Tibetan, then they say, according to their law.
Like human rights or environment
Oh,
or...
yes.
you
Now,
know.
law, I think, based on the realistic concept, right? And something, I think, based on compassion, ultimately. I think that law, of course, I think they provide happiness or satisfaction or right to everybody. So that law, that kind of law, of course, I think a source of happiness, source of progress. So protect that kind of law. And case of summary.
तपाईँ जुमा lawyers देशिगरा जुन सम्मुखीय तान्ता
So then, with that kind of law, and some individual, mischievous people, so long human society remain, mischievous people also always there. So, of course, the mischievous people misbehave themselves, okay, doesn't matter, but create suffering, create trouble to the society. Then law must protect.
Come to force.
So they protect the majority right of the interest or the right of the majority, and also the daba.
and justice for truth.
Again, you question, what is justice? What is truth? Bad things, harmful, also there is truth. Isn't it? So I don't know. Confusion.
I know. I think we're
It's
gonna
been
let
on
us.
my mind for a while. What can we do to convince the Chinese that Tibetans are their friends? So that we can...
I think it's the religious people. Now I think the Tibetan culture or Tibetan spirituality is now quite well known whole this world. Tibetan spirituality is something compassionate one, something good for environment, something good for humanity. And then furthermore, or secondly, to the Chinese, the Buddhism, say I think last more than 2,000 years, the Buddhism flourished in China. So even today, more and more Chinese now showing interest about Buddhism. So if Chinese need Buddhism, then the Tibetan culture, Tibetan spirituality is very much, need to the Chinese people. So preservation of Tibetan culture, Tibetan spirituality is interest of the Chinese people.
Right, exactly. And it's not a threat. It's not a threat.
So this I think is because of that logical spiritual brother showing concern about another spirituality. That's because of that moral thing, and then particularly the Tibetan compassionate spirituality is necessary to helpful to the Chinese people.
Right. And
Not just as a political side,
Right.
more spiritual way.
Right, right.
And then environment.
Right.
Environment.
Environment.
I think if we stress the environment, then the Chinese, large number of Chinese settlement, I think there also some connection. The small sort of area, although Tibet, huge land, but many land hilly, or rocky, hilly, and the northern sort of pasture, too cold. So they fertile, sort of, I think they
Valleys.
fertile, useful land and small area. Recent years, about 3 years ago, I mentioned it to you. I received one information from Pasha. It mentioned within next 30 years, 20 million Chinese going to settle in autonomous region of Tibet. And that's impractical. That's just a dream, I think. The land itself, you cannot sort of support 20 million Chinese. But in any way, you see the Tibetan environment weak, delicate. So for China, so it's a large number of Chinese settle. I think for environment very bad.
I agree.
Oh.
Yeah, unless they all become Buddhists.
even Buddhists, you see, they have mouth and stomach. Oh. So you see the exploitation, exploitation of Tibetan nature resources. Too many people, I think, very difficult.
Okay, so then the thing in dealing with the Chinese, it should be like at Synthesis 2, we saw non-confrontational attempt to communicate to the Chinese.
That's right.
That the Tibetan people are an asset, and Tibetan Buddhism is an asset to China.
Pandoyo said that. Oh, did it?
In fact, benefit to them.
Benefit to them. Benefit to them.
So, yes, since we are not asking sort of separation, so therefore the preservation, preserve or survival of Tibetan culture is actually enriching culture and spirituality of people from China.
Yeah, it benefits them. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that this new approach is geared to the Chinese leadership sparking realization that it's not about confrontation and therefore not about saving face, but about,
That's right.
you know what I'm saying?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, I got it.
And also some of my science friends, scientist friends, scientist friends, scientist friends. Also, some time ago, they wrote a letter, I think, to the Chinese government. They found the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, Buddhist philosophy, to the science, particularly in the field of about mind, about brain. Tibetan Buddhist philosophy is something useful. Therefore, as a scientist, they have some concern about preservation of Tibetan culture or Tibetan Buddhist spirituality. So I think that's nice.
Can I ask you something? Do you know anybody in the Chinese, not so much in the Chinese official leadership, but somebody in China who does not have a political office, who is respected by the Chinese government, who has an open mind that might be invited to, say, Synthesis, and could help to generate that change? See what I'm saying? Maybe.
So this is Dana Synthesis survey. No.
Synthesis 3.
That's open-minded.
There are. But the spiritual minded Karina Mishnah.
It's always not sure whether they are spiritual minded.
But see, they wouldn't have to be if they have an open mind, and they can get that realization that, oh, maybe we can have a change in our attitudes towards Tibet and Tibetans, and that actually they help the People's Republic of China.
But in any case, it is extremely important to invite some interfaith synthesis sort of meeting. Must invite. But I don't know in the individual Chinese. But you should. We will inquire. If we find some suitable person, that we must send an invitation, whether they come or not, whether they can come or not.
Do you think Sulak would have an idea here of some people?
Sulak.
I don't know. We can find out. We'll make some inquiries.
Then delegate the Harvard and Cook.
What
We
about,
must educate them, various levels.
very slowly, and I
Mm.
think in that non-confrontational context.
That's right, that's right.
They will open their hearts and
Mm.
have human
Mm.
contact with you and the others, and
Mm.
I think it'd be very good.
And some Chinese Catholics, some Chinese
Chinese Catholics.
Protestant, I think
Christian.
Christians.
Yes, yes, okay. Very good. We'll work on it.
Now I think that definitely now better opportunity
To contact them
uh,
and to interact with them.
Okay. We'll work, Barbara and I will work on that.
So we must catch up with this sort of opportunity.
We will. We'll work on it. We're working on it. We're gonna get there. Thank you. Bless you.
Thank you.
This is from my friend's team.
Mm.
Dr. Lam, we're going to take a few photographs. Okay.
Hi.
Please come. Dave. Some photos outside. Is this everybody?
Please come quickly, come quickly before we all get wet. We see. Thank you very much.
Where?